Okay, so get ready, because today we are diving into a case that is honestly just really makes you question like everything you think you know about human nature.
Yeah.
Dennis Rader,
The BTK Killer.
the BTK Killer. You sent me so much material on his crimes, and I have to say the thing that gets me is this jarring contrast, right?
Right.
Boy Scout leader, church president, family man,
Yeah.
all while leading this horrific secret life.
A double life, yeah.
A double life.
How is that even possible? Like, how do you even begin to reconcile those two things?
Yeah.
So today, that's exactly what we're going to unpack, right? We're going to try to figure out how Rader managed to maintain this facade, like, for so long. We're going to delve into the psychological factors that might have driven him. We're going to look at the steps that ultimately led to his capture. And we've got to talk about, there's this really unsettling detail in the material that you sent me where Rader compares himself to other notorious killers, like Jack the Ripper.
Right.
What does that tell us about his mindset?
Well, his motivations. I'm very curious to get your take on this.
What's fascinating about the BTK case is that it really forces us to confront this idea that evil can lurk beneath the surface of, seemingly ordinary people.
Yeah.
We often associate serial killers with a certain profile, right?
Yeah.
A certain darkness that's visible to the world. But Rader shattered that perception. He was the seemingly perfect neighbor, the guy you'd trust with your kids, right?
Right.
So how did this ordinary man become a monster?
Yeah.
That's what we'll be exploring today.
Absolutely. So let's start with Rader's early life. Was there anything in his childhood that, according to the research that you sent, that hinted at this darkness to come?
Well, it's interesting because on the surface, Rader's upbringing in Wichita appears very typical.
Okay.
Stable family, middle-class upbringing. But when you dig a little deeper, you start to see the cracks in the facade.
Yeah.
Even as a child, he displayed some troubling behaviors, like torturing animals. And he harbored these, dark fantasies centered around control and violence.
That's so disturbing. Animal torture is often seen as a warning sign, right?
Yes, it's often considered a red flag in the development of violent offenders.
Yeah.
It suggests a lack of empathy, desensitization to suffering, a desire to exert power over vulnerable creatures.
Okay. So he is exhibiting these really disturbing tendencies even as a child, yet he goes on to create this seemingly perfect life, marriage, kids, active in the community. How did he manage to compartmentalize these two drastically different sides of himself?
Well, compartmentalization is a complex psychological defense mechanism that allows individuals to separate, conflicting thoughts or emotions or experiences. It's like creating mental silos where one part of your life doesn't contaminate the other.
So in Rader's mind, the loving family man and the sadistic killer existed in separate compartments. They never really interacted.
Exactly. And it's this ability to compartmentalize that allowed him to function seemingly normally while committing these horrific acts. In fact, some experts believe that his meticulous rule-following nature, which served him well in his professional life, might have actually fueled his ability to compartmentalize.
Wow.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it?
It's incredibly disturbing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the moment that this carefully constructed facade begins to crumble.
Right.
The Otero family murders in 1974.
Yes.
This was Rader's brutal introduction to the world as BTK, right?
Yes, the Otero family murders were a turning point, not just in Rader's life, but in the history of Wichita.
Yeah.
He broke into the Otero home, and he murdered 4 members of the family, Joseph and Julie Otero, along with their 2 children, Josephine and Joseph Jr.
God.
The crime scene was horrific, marked by, this kind of calculated cruelty that would become his signature.
And it was after the Otero murders that he first used the name BTK, right? Bind, torture, kill. Why the need to give himself this moniker? To announce his crimes to the world.
Well, this is where we start to see the psychological complexities of Rader's personality. The murders themselves weren't enough. He craved recognition. He wanted to instill fear. He wanted to be in control of the narrative. By sending a letter to the local newspaper, detailing the murders and signing it BTK, he was, in a sense, branding himself, creating a legend.
It's almost like he wanted to be infamous, like he saw himself in the same league as these notorious figures from history.
There's definitely an element of narcissism at play here.
Yeah.
Serial killers often crave notoriety.
Right.
They see themselves as superior, as masters of manipulation.
Right.
And they want the world to acknowledge their genius.
Yeah.
For Rader, the name BTK became a symbol of his power, his control, his ability to outsmart the authorities.
So he's playing this very dangerous game, right?
Yeah.
Taunting the police while simultaneously trying to maintain this image as this upstanding citizen.
Right.
How did he manage to keep this up for so long?
Well, Rader was a master manipulator. He blended in seamlessly with everyday life. His job as a compliance officer further reinforced his image as a rule follower, someone who was, above suspicion.
Right.
He was, in essence, the perfect chameleon.
It's terrifying to think that someone you might interact with on a daily basis could be harboring such darkness.
Right.
But his need for control, for recognition, wouldn't allow him to stay silent for long.
Right.
He would strike again, and his crimes would escalate in their brutality.
Exactly. Rader's murders weren't just these random acts of violence. They were meticulously planned and executed. Each one was really a chilling reflection of his need for control and this perverse fascination with his own legend. In 1977, after a period of silence, which must have felt agonizing for him, he struck again, taking the lives of Shirley Vianian and Nancy Fox.
It's like this need to terrorize, to hold the city in his grip, was this addiction he couldn't shake. The sources that you shared mentioned how he would even call the police reporting the locations of his victims. Why this constant need to insert himself into the investigation? What was that about?
It's a classic example of what criminologists call signature behavior, right?
Okay.
It goes beyond the act of killing. It's about the killer, leaving their mark, injecting their personality into the crime. For Rader, it was about demonstrating his power, reminding everyone that he was always one step ahead. The phone calls, the letters, they were all part of his twisted game.
And the level of detail he included in his communications is just bone-chilling. It wasn't just about confessing, it was about relishing in the horror, ensuring everyone knew the extent of his depravity.
He seemed to, derive this perverse pleasure from describing the fear his victims experienced. It's a disturbing insight into his psyche. It suggests a very, deep-seated sadism, a need to not only control, but to inflict suffering.
But even with this escalating pattern of terror, he managed to evade capture for years.
Yeah.
How did he maintain this double life, this facade of normalcy, while committing these horrific acts?
Well, part of it was his meticulous nature. He planned his crimes carefully, taking steps to, avoid leaving evidence. He also benefited from the limitations of forensic technology at the time.
Yeah.
But perhaps the most significant factor was his ability to compartmentalize, to separate his, dark side from his public persona.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it?
It is.
To think that someone could be capable of such calculated cruelty while simultaneously living a seemingly ordinary life, it really challenges our assumptions about who we can trust, right?
Absolutely. And that's one of the most enduring legacies of the BTK case. It forced us to confront this uncomfortable reality that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a friendly face, a neighborly smile.
Okay, so we've established that Rader was a master manipulator, a meticulous planner, someone who craved recognition and control. But then, after years of silence, he resurfaces in 2004.
Right.
What triggered this reappearance? Was it simply a case of boredom, as some have speculated?
Well, that's a question that has puzzled investigators and psychologists alike. Some believe he was driven by a need to reassert control, to remind everyone that he was still out there.
Yeah.
Others suggest he might have been seeking a thrill, a way to relive past glories.
Right.
It's also possible that on some subconscious level, he desired to be caught, that the burden of his secrets had become too heavy to bear.
That's a really fascinating point. I mean, we often think of serial killers as wanting to remain anonymous, to avoid capture. But in Rader's case, there seems to have been this conflicting desire to be both recognized and elusive.
Exactly. And this internal conflict ultimately led to his downfall. In his arrogance, he believed he could outsmart the authorities, that he could control the narrative until the very end. But he underestimated the power of technology.
You're talking about the floppy disk, right?
Yes.
That was the crucial turning point, the mistake that finally brought him down.
Absolutely.
Can you walk us through how that unfolded?
So in 2005, Rader sends a message to the Wichita Eagle, the local newspaper, that he had used to communicate with the public and police before.
Right?
In this message, he asked a seemingly innocuous question. Can I communicate with you on a floppy disk and not be traced to a computer?
Oh, wow.
The police, sensing an opportunity, instructed the paper to respond in the affirmative. This was a trap, and Rader, in his arrogance, walked right into it.
It's almost like he was taunting them, challenging them to catch him.
There's definitely an element of that, but I think it also speaks to his, growing desperation, his need for attention, for a resolution to this run-a-hobber game he had been playing for so long. He sent the disc, believing he had taken all the necessary precautions, but he had overlooked one crucial detail: metadata.
Now, for those of us who aren't like tech wizards,
Yeah?
can you explain what metadata is and why it proved to be Rader's undoing?
So metadata is essentially data about data. It's information that's embedded in files, often hidden from view, that can reveal details about when a file was created or modified or accessed. In Rader's case, investigators were able to extract metadata from the floppy disk, even though he had attempted to delete the files.
So even though he thought he had covered his tracks, this hidden information betrayed him.
It did.
What did the metadata reveal?
It contained the name Dennis and a link to the Christ Lutheran Church.
Wow.
With this crucial piece of information, investigators were able to quickly identify Dennis Rader, the church council president, as their prime suspect.
Oh my God.
They obtained a warrant for his DNA, and the results confirmed their suspicions. It matched samples taken from the crime scenes. The game was up.
It's amazing how technology, which Rader thought he could manipulate to his advantage, ultimately became his downfall.
Right.
On February 25, 2005, after decades of terror, Dennis Rader was finally arrested.
Yes.
What was his reaction when confronted with the overwhelming evidence against him?
That's where the story takes an even darker turn. Rader didn't just confess. He seemed to relish recounting the details of his crimes.
Yeah, he seemed to, revel in the spotlight. He was providing these gruesome details of his crimes with a detached, almost clinical tone. He even referred to his murders as projects, like they were tasks on a to-do list.
Ugh, it's sending chills down my spine. This detail about calling his murders projects, it's just, I don't know, it suggests a complete lack of empathy, like an inability to grasp the magnitude of the suffering that he caused.
Absolutely. It speaks to a profound psychological disconnect. And this detachment is further underscored by his attempts to rationalize his behavior. He often referenced what he called Factor X, this uncontrollable urge that he claimed compelled him to kill.
So he was trying to shift blame, to suggest that he wasn't fully responsible for his actions. It's certainly possible. Many serial killers attempt to distance themselves from their crimes by attributing them to these external forces or uncontrollable impulses. But in Rader's case, it's hard to ignore the meticulous planning, the control he exerted over his victims, the deliberate steps he took to evade capture. Factor X might have been a convenient explanation, a way to, maintain a sense of self-preservation, but it doesn't account for the calculated cruelty that defined his crimes.
And this need for recognition, for notoriety, it seems to have persisted even after his arrest. He compared himself to Jack the Ripper, the son of Sam, almost as if he wanted to be part of this, infamous pantheon of serial killers.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme in serial killer psychology. They crave not just power and control, but also infamy. They want their names to be etched in history, their crimes to be remembered. In a twisted way, Rader achieved that. The BTK case continues to fascinate and horrify, serving as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary individuals.
But Rader's capture wasn't just about bringing one man to justice. It also had a profound impact on the community he had terrorized for so long. Wichita had lived under the shadow of BTK for decades. What was the aftermath like for the people who had unknowingly shared their lives with a monster?
Well, the sense of relief was palpable, the nightmare was finally over, but there was also a deep sense of betrayal, especially for those who knew Rader personally. Imagine discovering that your neighbor, your church leader, the man who helped you with your groceries, was a cold-blooded killer. It shattered their sense of security, their trust in their community.
It's like something out of a horror movie, but it was all too real for the people of Wichita. The scars of Rader's crimes run deep, and the healing process is ongoing.
Yeah, the impact of these crimes extends far beyond the immediate victims. It ripples through families, communities, leaving a legacy of fear and mistrust. In the case of Wichita, Rader's betrayal was particularly profound because he was so deeply embedded in the fabric of their lives. He was a Boy Scout leader, a church president, a trusted member of the community. This made his crimes all the more devastating, shaking the very foundation of their sense of safety.
So Rader's behind bars, justice has been served, But what about the bigger picture? What lessons can we learn from this case? What are the takeaways for, like, law enforcement, for psychology, for society as a whole?
Well, the BTK case has been a subject of intense study ever since Rader's arrest. It's forced us to re-examine our assumptions about criminal profiling, about the nature of evil, about the masks that people can wear. Rader's seemingly ordinary life, his ability to compartmentalize, his meticulous planning, all challenge our traditional notions of what a serial killer looks like and how they operate.